Hello, my name's Roisin and May is Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Hello friends and welcome back to my channel. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, this month is Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And so I thought I would recommend you some books that I have read by Asian authors that I think are excellent. I think that it's always important to try and broaden your reading outlook, particularly by people who are underrepresented in the mainstream publishing in general and booktube more specifically. So I have 10 books for you that are literary and historical fiction from Asian writers, and non-fiction. Actually, I think there's one non-fiction in here too. I think that this year in particular, Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month has a specific resonance because this has been such a bad year for people of Asian descent. As you probably know, there has been a rise in hate crimes against Asian American and Asian European people over the course of the coronavirus pandemic, because the pandemic started in Asia and because of conspiracy theories and politicians demonizing China. And on top of this as well, more recently, India has been very, very hard hit by the coronavirus pandemic, running out of oxygen and by a new strain that seems to be particularly virulent. Also, at the time of filming, Palestine is under bombardment by the Israeli state, and so there are lots of casualties and deaths that have been caused by this conflict in Palestine, and on top of that, Palestine too is running out of oxygen and has been blockaded from receiving health supplies. So I'm going to leave information and links about all three of those topics that have been affecting Asia recently, and I will leave places to donate and places to get information in the description below if you would like to learn more and if you can possibly donate. So now to move on to the recommendations, these 10 books by Asian authors that I have particularly loved. I don't think I have ever read a book by a Pacific Islander author. May is Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So if you have any recommendations by Pacific Islander authors, please leave them in the comments below. I would love to hear your recommendations. I'm sure anyone else watching this who also would like some Pacific Island recommendations would appreciate reading your comments if you leave them. The first book I'm going to talk about is one that I've talked about a fair bit because I think it is such an interesting book, and that is Jeong Born at 1982 by Cho Nam Joo. This is a book that is about a woman called Kim Jiyoung, which is the most common name for a woman in South Korea. And it begins with her having a mental breakdown, and then we go back into her past and her childhood and follow her life story while she talks about all of the traumas and microaggressions that she experienced because of sexism in Korea, around education, around brothers getting more food and being more worthy, being deemed more important, around career and childbearing and all these other elements that have contributed to her feeling of alienation and her eventual breakdown. This book is written in such an interesting style. It's very detached and it has lots of sources and information that relates to studies that have been done on these phenomena that are happening to Kim Jiyoung by different psychologists and sociologists in South Korea. It's also interesting to see the ways in which these things relate to other parts of the world, because a lot of the ways that sexism and patriarchy works are similar throughout the entire world. This is a really, really short book, and I know that some people can struggle, myself included, with books that feel really detached, but because this is so short, I would urge you to persevere, because the ending of this book has such a twist in the tale that I think really drives home the point of the book. It's done in such an excellent way that I think really makes it worth it to persevere throughout. Next, I have a book that is set during World War II, and if you know anything about my reading habits, I love historical fiction but don't particularly enjoy World War II fiction. However, as this one is set in Singapore by a Singaporean author, I think that makes a lot of difference than the mainstream World War II fiction here in the UK. This book is How We Disappeared by Jing and is set over 2 time periods. The first one being during the Second World War and the second one being around the year 2000. And we follow 3 different points of view. So we follow our main character in World War II when she is from an impoverished family in rural Singapore. And then we also follow her again into the year 2000 when she has just lost her husband. And then we also follow a young boy who has just lost his grandma and is discovering a family secret that has been hidden for years. This is a particularly harrowing book that deals with the Japanese practice of comfort women during the Sino-Japanese War and afterwards into the Second World War. It also deals with modern Singapore and the way that older and poor people are treated in modern day Singapore and the extreme capitalism and one-party state system that they have going on. It is a book that seems like it's going to be really bleak because of that, but there is also a lot of family and hope and reconnection, particularly in the 2000s section, and also the hope and the way that the women who have been kidnapped and sold into sexual slavery, the way that they work together, I think is really touching, even though the rest of the book is so brutal. The way that Lee manages to get us into her character's psyche and to feel the detachment and disassociation, but also the kind of trauma that has been inflicted on her and her opening up, it's really, really moving and really well done. I don't think that it is too maudlin or too sentimental in any way, and I really appreciate that aspect of it. Number 3 is Braised Pork by An Yu, which I read last year, and this is set in modern day Beijing. It's another very short book and written in such a kind of dreamlike way that I think really works for the concept of this book. This is about Jia, who one day finds her husband dead in the bathtub face down with a picture of a merman or a fishman next to him. And she is confused by what this fishman is. And she also finds herself she has no job, and she finds herself like in financial difficulty and unsure of her status, her identity, because again, this deals kind of with the patriarchal structure of China, but it also deals with grief and loss and family. It has kind of magical elements that get more and more magical as Jia tries to work out what has happened with this fishman, what is the secret of the fishman. She goes into this kind of watery world, and you're never quite sure whether it's like really happening or if it's just her mental state. It is such a strange book that it's really hard to get a handle of, which is why I'm having difficulty describing the plot to you or what it's actually about, because it's kind of a slippery book that you never can quite pinpoint, but I think that it is a really great reading experience. It is quite beautifully written in that weird dreamlike way, so if that's something that you like, hard to pin down books, then I think this one would really work for you. Another book by a South Korean author that I would recommend is If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha. I know this one has been talked about quite a lot on BookTube, and I think with good reason. It is a book that is kind of dark and biting and funny, and also melancholy, but also has a lot of hope and like good relationships in it. I think it's one of those books that walks the commercial literary line very well, so that it would appeal to a broad range of people, whether you prefer things that are more literary or you prefer things that have more of a plot, because this both has a plot and a character centric focus, and also deals a lot with ideas. It is told from the perspective of 4 different women, although there are kind of 6 different women that are characters that we follow in this book, and their experience of modern day Seoul. It talks about the beauty industry, it talks about the sex work industry, it talks about orphanages, and it talks about maternity leave and the treatment of women in the workplace, and the expectations of women in the workplace. It talks about violence against women, and it talks about poverty and also the work culture of Korea. So there's a lot jammed into this small book, but it is done in such a accessible way that I think makes it perfect for a lot of different readers. All these girls are really well-rounded characters, and I feel like they're really successfully differentiated from each other, which is quite difficult when writing from 4 different perspectives in such a short book. There are moments of really biting satire that's really funny. There are also moments of real warmth and community, and I think that it's a book that you could read multiple times and get multiple different things out of. Last year for the Asian Readathon, I read Amnesty by Aravind Adiga, and this is a book set in Australia about a Sri Lankan man who is an undocumented immigrant in Australia, but he was fleeing Sri Lanka as a refugee, but wasn't granted refugee status, and so is there as an undocumented immigrant. He is working as a cleaner, and one of the people that he used to work for and had kind of a friendship, strange relationship with, has been found dead. And then there is a clue about it that means that he knows who did it, but he doesn't know whether to go to the police, because if he tells them and helps them in their investigation, there's a good chance that he will be deported. We follow him over the course of 24 hours in this very tense book as he decides what to do about this situation. And also it talks about what the feeling is of being an undocumented immigrant, and the many things that the constant tension and constant being on edge. I think that it really grasps that atmosphere really, really well. It's also if you are from Australia or you are someone who knows Sydney really well, I think that it would work well for you as a book, because it talks about Sydney neighbourhoods and gentrification and all that sort of thing. That kind of went over my head because I don't know Sydney at all, but I think that it does a good job of setting the atmosphere, and I did get to know Sydney over the course of this book. Our main character is a really great character as well, really well-rounded and you really feel for him, and Adiga manages to make us both want him to go to the police and also want him to not go to the police as we explore his history with this woman and also his history in Sri Lanka. Next is a book by a Canadian-Chinese author, and that is Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeline Thien. I absolutely loved this book when I read it a few years ago, and it is one that has really stuck with me ever since. It tells the story of a girl who has escaped from China as a refugee after the Tiananmen Square massacre, and she ends up in Canada with some of her family. Over the course of this, she tells the young girl in this mother-daughter family the story of her grandparents and her great-uncle and her whole family from the Maoist revolution through the Cultural Revolution and up to the Tiananmen Square crisis in China. It is such a broad, sweeping, epic novel that talks about love and passion and music in such a wonderfully beautiful, lyrical way. I think that it has such great atmosphere, and it really talks about what people will do for love and also what tyranny does to people and how people can get swept up in a kind of mass hysteria, which I think was a really interesting aspect of this. I liked the way that it felt almost like a epic kind of old-fashioned fairy tale in some aspects of it, with people being sent to the desert and stuff, but then also felt really, really grounded in real history, which of course it is. I feel like there was a lot of like mystery to it that kept me going through the story, and lots of really, really great relationships between uncles and nieces and just generally throughout this family, and a through thread of a passion and love of music. It's really chunky, so if you really want to get your teeth into something quite epic like that, then I think that Do Not Say We Have Nothing is a good book for that. Then the final novel that I would like to recommend you is The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. So although this book is called The English Patient and is set in Italy and has 2 Canadian characters in it, Michael Ondaatje is a Sri Lankan writer, and this tells the story of a man who has been burnt during the Second World War, and he's in a villa in Italy as the Allies sweep through Italy, but he is there with his nurse, who is Canadian, and someone she knows, a thief from her past, who is also Canadian, and then there is a man who is a sapper, which is like a combat engineer who is trying to defuse a mine that is in the back garden of this villa, and he is, I believe he is a Sikh man from Punjab. Kind of tells the story of the man who is burnt to a crisp and how he got there before the Second World War and his affair with a woman, but it also tells the story of what is going on now as they kind of work out through this story that he is telling them who he is, and the relationships between these people, between the sapper and the nurse, who have a relationship, and also the concept of war in general. It's very much about war, but in a quite different way. I remember particularly the sapper's reaction to the nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki really stuck with me. It talks about race and racism and colonialism, whilst also having kind of a beautiful love story and turned away from the direction you think it's going in. It's got some of the most beautiful lyrical writing that I have ever read, and it's one of my favourite books of all time because of that. I love the descriptions, I love the characters, I think that it is so well woven together. It's one of those books with no punctuation, and it doesn't tell you when it's changing direction of narrative, like whose perspective we're seeing things from, but I think that it really works with the style that it's written in, that's so poetic and like moving and quite melodic in a way. And then a little novella that's told in vignettes, so it's very differently structured from a lot of these other books, and that is Rue by Kim Thuy, who is a Vietnamese Canadian author, and it tells the story of this family who are escaping at the end of the Vietnam War and end up as refugees in Canada. They are like a middle class family in Vietnam, and their experience of the communist rebels, and then also their experience of escape and of living in a refugee camp in Thailand, and then escaping and then getting to Canada, and their experience in Canada as well. It's told through the really beautiful little vignettes that are almost like prose poems, and it's such a strongly visual book, which is one of the things that I loved about it. It's very short, so you can get through it in a very quick amount of time, but I also think that taking your time over each of these vignettes is really worthwhile. The beauty of the writing and the slow pace of the book and the kind of disjointedness kind of feels really immersed in the trauma that must have been experienced, because Kim Thuy is someone who did escape from the Vietnam in this way. There is one section that I would like trigger warn you about that deals with kind of a one of her aunts has learning difficulties, and there is some abuse and ableism related to that, although I believe that the book is commenting on the ableism of the Vietnamese culture, because this is not a book that is very much like these are the bad guys, these are the good guys. It's very like morally grey. I think that that can be difficult to read, although I do think that that is what Thuy is commenting on in the course of the novel. Then I would also recommend a collection of short stories, and that is Escape Routes by Naomi Ishiguro, which I read last year and really loved. This is a collection of kind of slightly fantasy, kind of fabulous, speculative short stories that cover a whole range of topics. They're a collection of 3 stories that kind of work together into a novella about a rat catcher in a fairy tale, kind of dark, twisted fairy tale castle, which I absolutely loved. There's also a story about a boy who is trying to draw concepts like infinity inside of his cupboard, and I think that that was done really well as well. It's just, there's so much beauty and whimsy in the writing here and a lot of darkness. I'm not someone who has had a huge amount of experience reading short stories, but there's something that I've been getting more into recently, and Escape Routes by Naomi Ishiguro is one of the collections that really got me into it, although I would say that I didn't love the first story as much as all of the rest, so I don't know what that says, but I really loved the rest of them and thought that they were so whimsical and lovely, and I just loved the style of the writing and couldn't put that book down. I find it kind of hard to describe a collection of short stories, but I would 100% recommend them. And then finally I have a piece of non-fiction, and that is Inglorious Empire by Shashi Tharoor. This is about what the British did in India, and it is based, it started because Shashi Tharoor was involved in a debate at Oxford University about whether the British Empire should pay reparations. And his argument that Britain should pay £1 as reparations, but really what it should be would be an acknowledgement of the damages that Britain committed against the rest of the world. But because this debate was about the British Empire more generally, he decided to write this book about India specifically, as he is an Indian writer and politician. And he went into depth about all of the things that happened in India and sort of arguing against some of the people who say things like Britain civilised India or Britain gave India the railways, and he talks about how yes they did, but whilst doing that they were incredibly brutal to the Indian workforces, and they didn't do it for the Indians, they did it to extract wealth from India. It's a really accessible book if you are someone who doesn't have a huge background reading like political history and stuff, which I don't, and I think it was really well written, and it goes into detail, and it is, I think, as fair-handed as possible. Like, it does talk about some things that are still existing and the positive aspects of them, shows all sides and what other people believe and why he disagrees with that, and I think he does it in a way that is, as I said, really accessible and really gives you a lot of like factual information in a narrative way, so that it is easier for someone who doesn't love a lot of statistics to understand. And I think also that if you can listen to the audiobook, really do, because he has a really great voice, and I think that he reads it himself, so it is a really lovely audio experience. So those are 10 books by Asian authors that I would recommend to you this month. Please let me know in the comments any books by Asian authors or Pacific Island authors that you would recommend to me. I would love to hear what you would recommend. And please also remember that all those links to information and to places to donate will be in the description box if you possibly can. Thank you for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it and to subscribe. I put out new videos every Wednesday, Friday and Sunday, so I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye!